Hello everybody and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. For the last 6 months, I've had the same analysis talking about how once we get above 25K, I believe that we were going to see Bitcoin going upwards of 40 and 50,000. We are now starting that next leg up after breaking out of over 200 days worth of accumulation, and we are now sitting above $34,000. This is exactly what I was expecting to have happen. It just took a long time worth of price action to get to that point. Now comes the moment of truth where we're finally getting that next leg up to 50K. So I'm going to break down exactly what we need to be watching for, which altcoins are being outliers, and how we can go about making the most money off of this next leg up. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And with that being said, let's jump right into this amazing video today. Now, to answer the simple question, where have I been at for the last couple weeks? Now, right off the bat, guys, my grandmother passed away. She's actually my next door neighbor. My grandparents both live next door. I've been very close with them my entire life, probably more so with them than ever before. I always made the joke on the channel, back before I was able to find success in the last bull market. There was a time where, it was 2018, I didn't have any money. I was living in my grandma's basement, and that was kind of where I got the whole idea to really go head first into YouTube. And it was because I was living with my grandma that I was actually able to focus on YouTube full time. And so that's the same grandma that unfortunately passed away. And so, it's been a little bit tough. I've just been helping out with the funeral, helping out with my family. My grandpa's alone, and so I've been spending more time with him. And then there was also another thing. My buddy offered me a really high-paying position in his new startup, which is an oil-field company. I ended up taking that. A lot of it's really just me working from my same home base, doing paperwork, making sure guys are out on job sites. But then sometimes I do actually have to go out into the field, take paperwork, check in on different things, make sure the guys are doing their positions, make sure they're filling them out accordingly. So that's kind of what has been going on. I got a really high paying job, so I wanted to take that as another opportunity to add more crypto while we're down in these lower points. And then I've also been dealing with a lot of stuff in my family. So I wanted to quickly just explain what was going on, where I've been. Now let's get into the video. Now guys, for the last, 200 plus days, basically ever since over in here in March, when we very first broke out of the 25K level, I have stuck with the exact same analysis, more or less stating repeatedly, I believe that if we're above 25K as support, we are going to be seeing a high upwards of 40K, which is right here, or 50K, which is right here. And I still firmly believe that. Now what we're finally starting to see is Bitcoin breaking out. We have spent over 200 days inside of this accumulation range. A little over 210, 15, approximately, depending on where you draw it. Just the point I'm making, we've been over 200 days consolidating on top of 25K as support. So when we were unable to actually fail support over in this period, that's when I started to get the assumption that, hey, maybe this is actually going to end up being a true retest and we're going to start breaking out. And then when we broke out of our descending resistance right here, got that retest in the mid-range, I told you guys how this is literally the last moment of truth for the bulls. If we're bullish, we should see an instant breakout. If we're bearish, this will fail. We'll probably come back down to 25K the 25K level before actually dropping to one more final low. So as you guys can tell, the bullish case scenario has played out. We retested the descending resistance and we instantly got a buyback. Now, I told you guys in my last videos that the second that this range breaks out, if bullish or bearish, in this case bullish, whenever we break out of something that's taking over 100 to 200 days, just trending sideways, building a foundation, whenever the breakout happens, it's always something that's going to be very quick and sudden. All of the length of consolidation was here, right? This was all of the lengthy time where we were going up and down, ping-ponging between 25K support and $32,000, really $31,000 resistance. We had spent 200 days here, and so for us to finally break out, retest, and now get continuation, I'm personally not surprised at all that from the bottom of the retest to where we're at, it's taken 15 days and we've went from 26,000 all the way up to 35, 36,000. So it's not surprising, and it shouldn't be surprising to any of you guys. Now, if you guys have been paying attention to our analysis, we've been very spot on. Now, ever since over in here when we broke out of 25K, I told you guys that as long as we're holding support above this 25K region, I believe that we're going to see continuation to the upside. Now, I would be lying if I thought that we were going to see 200 days worth of sideways accumulation, creating this kind of sideways channel. I didn't think that it would take that long, but the market has a way of tricking people. It has a way of dragging things out to the max extent to where people start capitulating, people give up, people don't want anything to do with it, and that's always right before the market starts taking off. And so we've been very spot on with everything up to this point. Now that we're seeing the continuation, we're still sticking to the same targets, which are going to be 40K and 50K up here. Remember, guys, what I've always maintained is that I believed this first beginning uptrend is very similar to what we saw in 2019. And if you guys don't remember what that was like, let me get into a shorter time frame. Let's zoom it all out and let's actually talk about this. Because what I was drawing for a long time has been that this consolidation is more or less the exact same consolidation as this higher high sitting on top of 25K. And I drew it the exact same way. I said how I remembered all the way back in 2019 when we got this first big breakout, we started making this head and shoulder type pattern, and a lot of people were expecting that this right shoulder was going to come in, and then that would be the end of that move. And that wasn't what happened. We in fact went for one more final high, and that was our true blow off top. And I've maintained the same analysis, mainly because the price action looks the same, and also because, in my opinion, what we're seeing between the two cycles is very similar. The overall difference that we're seeing is basically the length of time that it's taking. We're seeing a lengthier period of time. There's not quite as much volatility, which, if you guys are aware of Bitcoin cycles, that's just a trend that's always happened. The more money, the more liquidity that we have inside of a market, the less volatile that market gets. Bitcoin's still doing its thing. It's still outperforming the rest of the markets. It's still providing great gains and a great opportunity for upside potential if you're buying, you're getting in early, you're investing for the long haul. The only difference is, in the last cycle, it didn't take 200 days that we were stuck inside of this range. It more or less happened over the course of maybe 1 to 2 months, maybe 45 days. It wasn't a very long period of time. And then we got that blow off top. Whereas what we're looking at right now is a little bit different, right? We saw a much lengthier period of trending on top of this 25K level. We spent 200 days out on top of this level after the breakout, and now we're finally starting to see the resolution of what I was anticipating. I do believe that this is the final blow off top at the beginning of this cycle, because one of the most important things we have to remember here is that at the beginning of a cycle, Bitcoin never just goes straight into new all-time highs. And I don't believe that this will be the first time that it happens, although anything is possible. Remember, in our 2019 cycle, we had never once seen this big of a higher high, right? If we're looking at this from Fibonacci, this went all the way to the 618 Fibonacci. And if we're looking at all of our prior cycles, the very first breakout really only went a short ways, right? This one went in between the 236 and the 382. That was 2016. If we go all the way back to, 2011, this one didn't even hit the 236. So what we've seen in all of our cycles up to this point has kind of been a short, sudden impulse, followed by us kind of going back down to that trend line and us building a stable foundation of support before going into new all-time highs. But the thing I want you guys to remember is that every single time, every one of these bear markets, more or less excluding this one just because this was a little bit of a shortened one, it's always taken a long period of time before we're ever at the point of breaking out. And one of the most, easy to identify patterns is really the Bitcoin halving. So right over here was our Bitcoin halving. This was the first Bitcoin halving that we ever had. Now what you guys are going to notice, and this is going to be the case on every one of our main trend lines and bull cycles, is after the end of our bear market, we start this pretty steady and sudden, uptrend. Higher highs, higher lows. Usually if we get a correction, it comes back down and retests that main trend. Then we see the halving take place, and then shortly after the halving is generally where we're going to see the price of Bitcoin skyrocket in value. Now, I'm not talking about the halving so much. I'm not really trying to say my opinions on whether I think it's the reason Bitcoin has bull cycles or whether it's something entirely different. All I'm sharing with you guys is something to help you visualize where we're at in the cycle. And the halving, in my opinion, is really one of the most valuable things that we can draw when looking at each and every cycle. Now, once again, in the same sort of way, once we finish the end of our bear cycle, just like we did in the first cycle, Bitcoin did the same thing in 2016. We break out, make short impulses, higher highs and higher lows, break out, make corrections, always maintaining support on top of that trend line, and then that's where we get that breakout into new all-time highs. But where's the halving? The halving in 2016 was right around the 4th of July. It was right at this lower high before we saw one more big correction that took place and brought us back down to that mean trend line. Now, if you guys are going to remember, this is going to be something you need to pay attention for, because what we see in every single one of our Bitcoin cycles up to this point has been for us to have a 1-year bear market. After the bear market, we start the new uptrend. And once that halving actually takes place, this is right around the midway cycle point between the high of the cycle and the low of the cycle. Usually that's going to be about right in the middle. And then we get that halving, and this is what takes us into new all-time highs. Once we get the halving, that's really where the parabolic part of the cycle starts. Now, I'm not trying to tell you guys if the reason why it happens is because of the halving. I just think that it's a part of Bitcoin that is programmed that we're going to see it happen regardless. And I think that the way people accumulate, the way emotions work, and how everything lines up inside of a Bitcoin cycle, I think that the halving is an important thing to factor in, because it does at least show that after the halving is when the majority of the bull run sets in. Whether you think that the whole reason why is because of the halving or if it's something else, that's totally beside the point. The main thing that we're talking about here is helping to understand where we're at in the big picture. Now, if we come into our last cycle that we saw, we see the same thing. The only difference here was we had this COVID black swan that temporarily broke below the trend line, but the second that it was over, we went right back to that trend line and then reclaimed it, right? So overall, this is just deviation. This doesn't really mean anything. It was just a better opportunity for people that wanted to buy to get in at the market at a major discount. Once the market started going up, it didn't change anything. The whole big picture completely stayed the same. Now, the big thing that we're going to look at now is the halving. Where was the halving in our last cycle? And we're basically looking at right around May 10th, I believe, was the exact day. But it was right around, the beginning of May, the first week or two of May. We saw that Bitcoin halving. And so once again, guys, we're looking at pretty much the same thing. We see the high of the cycle and the low of the cycle, and then this halving is more or less taking place right at the midway point between the high and the low. And what we see is right after the halving, that's where the majority of our parabolic impulse actually sets itself in. And so when we're looking at where we're at today, even though I still firmly believe that we're about to see this next high take us upwards of $48,500 before it's done, I do believe that we will see some type of corrective move to follow after. Is it possible that we just keep, kind of doing this same thing all the way to new all-time highs? I would say it's possible, but the thing I'm personally looking at is where does our halving line in with all of this? How does the halving factor in? Because that is where we're going to be able to determine how much farther we have, or how much lengthier of a period of consolidation we'll go after before this, or once this move is actually finished. So the way that our projected, we're looking at April, sometime in April. I'm just going to draw the midway point of April. So Monday, April 15th of 2024. That is when our projected Bitcoin halving is to take place. And we're actually getting pretty close to that point. I don't know exactly when our top is going to be, but I would assume that, because we already spent 200 days accumulating inside of the range on top of 25K, I don't think that it's going to take very long for us to get all the way back up to this resistance. And I do think that once we hit this resistance, that is where we will see some type of a corrective move. The way I'm drawing my Elliott wave count, because we broke out, this means that this entire consolidation on top of 25K was a wave 4 correction. Now what we're seeing next is our final wave 5 before our first impulse is over. And it's really not any different than the impulse that we saw in 2019. The only real difference here is the one in 2019 took a much, much shorter period of time. I believe that it was, maybe 200 days from the peak low to the high of that move. By the time it was done, and we spent 200 days just inside of us ranging on 25K support. So already the length of time creating this impulse versus this impulse, it's taken much more time. And I think a lot of that has to do with just simply because to get the same type of impulses, it's either going to take more time or a significant amount of more money. Obviously, I mean, it's going to take more money if we're going to see the market move because Bitcoin's worth a whole lot more today. But I think that that's something we need to remember. Volatility dies out because there's so much money that it takes to move the price in the same way. This could be the final cycle or the final bull run for Bitcoin where we have these massive parabolic type moves. I don't know that for sure. I'm not trying to bet anything towards that statement, but I think we need to do our part by really, capitalizing on the opportunities presented in front of us because of the fact we don't know how much more of these we're going to have. So far, everything's lining up just like any other cycle, which tells me we will have a normal 4-year cycle from here. However, what happens after our next bear market? Will we have another normal 4-year cycle? Will we have a longer bear market than before? I don't know, but I'm telling you guys right now that the way that I'm preventing losing out and potentially getting stuck in a multi-year bear market somewhere down the line and losing all my money is by capitalizing on this current bull run right now, because I don't think that anything else matters besides that. Now, if we're comparing the Elliott wave count going all the way back to 2019, we see pretty much the same thing. Big 1, 2, small wave 4, leading into a big blow-off top, wave 5. This tops at the 618 Fibonacci, which if I pull the Fibonacci, you guys are going to be able to see 618 right here. That's exactly where we topped. So if we're looking at this, to my opinion, it's all pretty much the same thing. The only difference is our wave 4 correction took 200 days ranging on top of support before we got that blow off top. It didn't change anything as far as the wave count. It just was the amount of time that it took to get that same type of a move. Because if you guys remember, $48,500 is going to be perfectly flush with that 618 Fibonacci right here. And that's exactly where I do believe that we're going to end up topping inside of this wave 5 impulse. It's not rocket science. I've had the same analysis for so long that it's nice to just finally get the confirmation, because one of the things I've been seeing so much of is because we were in the low point of the beginning of the uptrend, we're pretty much in the disbelief phase, right? And we talked a lot about this inside of, these charts right here, specifically the Wall Street cheat sheet. It's the same emotions that you're going to see every single cycle. Once you get the blow off top, you start the lower high, and then it goes all the way down to this massive crash. Now, inside of the crash, let's bring this to the front so we don't lose it. See this disbelief phase right here? It says disbelief. This is a sucker's rally. Now, this is what always happens after you have capitulation, anger, and depression. We got that here. Capitulation, anger, depression. And now, right when we first start to see that uptrend, we made our first higher high, actually above those, in the same way that it happens right here over here on this chart. We saw the same thing, and that was right when everybody was saying, oh man, have you ever heard of so-and-so? He says it's going to 10K. Oh, this guy that I've watched every day on YouTube, he says it's going to here. Or, oh man, you're an idiot. You never are right. You're always wrong about this. Here comes the next big dump. You see the same people saying the same crap every single time. And it's always so interesting to me how these same people are wrong almost every single time. What we're seeing is the same emotions being repeated every single cycle. The reason why I've been so bullish for Bitcoin and anticipating that Bitcoin was going to go for this next wave 5 is simply just because of the fact we literally flipped. I made a first higher high of a new trend, right? You have downtrends that go like this. Downtrends are lower lows and lower highs. Every time we hit one of these levels, the price goes lower, right? Indicated right here. We rejected here, we went lower. We rejected here, went lower. And then when the prices break out, this ended up having a retest of that trend. But even with it going lower, we were outside of descending resistance. This shows a trend change, right? Now, in the same way that once the price breaks out of a descending resistance going down, once it does that, it shows the reversal. We saw the reversal, but once again, we have to look at it from the alternative perspective, where if we're going to see an uptrend, what we have to see is the inverse of that, right? Instead of lower lows and lower highs, you have higher highs and higher lows, right? Where it's always uptrending as you go. And one of the things that we have to do that is for us to actually break out and make a higher high. So if this is our resistance, all of this is our resistance right here, mainly looking at 25K because these were lower highs. If 25K is our first resistance in the new uptrend, if we're going to see an uptrend and a reversal, we have to break above 25K, retest that as support, and once we do that, that is a confirmed trend reversal. That shows that the new trend has started. In this case, it would be an In this case, it would be an uptrend. So the second that we got above 25K, I had the same analysis. All I said was, if we're above 25K as support, this is going to go to 40 and 50K. And even though it took 200 plus days to get there, I've maintained the same analysis. And that's why you guys are going to find that my channel gets a little boring, because once I see something in the charts, I simply just wait for that to happen, because there's only a couple scenarios that can really play out. The price can go all kinds of different ways, but when we're looking level to level, it's going to have to go either above or below, and then that's where you get the confirmation. When we were above 25K, that was the confirmation. But we were ranging above 25K. We really needed to see this secondary breakout come in here for us to get the confirmation that yes, this is a new uptrend, and yes, we're going to go for that next high. And so as far as my analysis goes, nothing changes. We're still looking for that next leg up. And from there, that's where I do anticipate that we're going to see some downside action for Bitcoin and the rest of the market in the same way that it played out over here. The only difference, notice how it took all of this time after the top before we got to our halving. If we pull up our date tool to get a specific time, you know, it was almost exactly 1 year, 317 days from the peak of that first high to the point of us getting our Bitcoin halving. If you guys notice right here, assuming we top, you know, the end of the year, this year, what we're more or less going to be looking at is, you know, 120 days approximately before we're actually at that halving. So I think that what is most likely is that the correction isn't going to be the buy the dip opportunity quite yet, or at least once the halving takes place, I should say. Because if we get a correction right here, you know, we might consolidate on top of this level for, you know, a month or two. You know, we don't know exactly how long. After such a big move, distribution is something that could play out in a similar way of 2019, where if you guys notice, we kind of consolidated right up here in this triangle formation for a long period of time, right? It was at least a month that we sat in here. In fact, it was almost exactly 2 months that we sat inside of this little descending triangle. Then we broke down. You guys got to remember that we've been uptrending for a long time. Basically since November of last year, we've been in an uptrend. So if we're to see this end up peaking relatively close to a year after it started, don't be surprised if we go through a decent period of distribution before we get that next big drop. Because what I'm anticipating is, because of the length of time it's taken to get to this point, and because it's going to hug so closely to get close together with that halving, I won't be surprised if distribution takes place, the halving occurs, the halving leads us into that next major lower low before we come all the way back down and retest basically the bottom of this wave 4, basically talking about 30, more or less talking about a retest between 31K and 25K, somewhere inside of that range, which we're just going to grab it. It's basically this entire range right here. That's personally what I would be watching for, because what we have to see after 5 waves up is a correction of some kind. Generally what you're going to see is an ABC correction. An ABC correction. I won't be surprised if these are a little bit more volatile than what I have drawn here. You want them to be a little bit closer to being the same size both ways. But assuming we see a big ABC correction following after, one of the most standard ABCs you're going to see is us correcting back down to the 618, which the 618 is going to be $28,000. So, I mean, if Bitcoin goes all the way up to 50K, are you prepared to see Bitcoin basically revert 40-50% of that entire impulse? Because here's the thing, we should expect to see a big correction after. I don't know how the halving is going to factor into this, but one of the things that I do want to remind you guys of is actually the halving in 2016. This was the first halving that I was ever a part of. I bought my first Bitcoin at 450 bucks. It broke out, went to 790 shortly after, and I remember right here at the first lower high and the Bitcoin halving, I was so bullish. I took all of my Bitcoin I had, I threw it into a 10x margin long on Bitfinex, and I was about to get so rich, and I knew I was. And then the halving took place, and then we dipped another 20-25%, and I got liquidated. And I remember thinking, man, I'm such an idiot. Why did I do that? Why didn't I just wait? I could have just held my Bitcoin. You know, obviously it went up much higher from that point. But these are some things that happen during these periods. Remember, from where the halving was to where Bitcoin went, it dropped another 30%. So don't be caught off guard if this ends up turning into some type of similar corrective move where we finish 5 waves up. Maybe we get the ETF right up here. right? Maybe the Bitcoin ETF gets approved up at the very top or relatively close to the top of this 5-wave. Everybody's so bullish, everybody's buying. That's obviously going to be distribution. And then the halving comes in here, because keep in mind, depending on where we top, if we top at the end of the year, we're only looking at like 100 days until that halving, which would theoretically be the exact same period of time that it took for this consolidation to break down after the top of its first impulse. So everything's lining up accordingly for this halving to potentially be a sell the news type of event. Keep in mind that I still think that it's going to, factor in and be bullish long term. But, if we're looking at this, we see this big correction all the way back down. We're looking at, May, June, sometime in the summer for us to actually be at the low point of this consolidation. It might take a little while before we're at the point of us breaking out. The big thing that we need to remember here is no Bitcoin cycle has ever just gone straight up. All of them have landed in a period of reaccumulation after the first impulse. All of them so far have been a little bit different, but so far we're kind of lining up with this cycle being a little bit more similar to that 2019 impulse. Because if we're looking at our first and second ones, they're really similar, but they were way more consistent as far as their higher highs and higher lows. 2019 was way more volatile, much more impulsive. We had this little mini echo cycle to begin the new bull run. And I do think that so far we're lining up with this being a little bit more closer related to that 2019 cycle. I don't think that the length of time from the top to us breaking out is going to be the same as what it was in 2019 and 2020. I think it'll be a little bit quicker. But, we got to remember that there's never been a new Bitcoin impulse that hasn't corrected at least 40%. So from the high of us being at 48,500, for us to come back down to 30K, you're looking at about a 40% correction. If we come back down to 25K, you're looking at closer to a 50% correction. So in my opinion, high 30s to potentially 50%, that's the threshold that we should be factoring in when it comes time to talking a potential correction for Bitcoin, how the halving lines up, all of this stuff. Anyways, I wanted to give you guys this update just as a way to summarize some thoughts. I ended up talking a lot about Bitcoin. I had some other, charts planned for today's video, but I don't want to just overcomplicate things. I'll actually make that video tomorrow. So I wanted to give you guys an update as far as where I've been, what I've been doing, what's been going on in my life. Overall, you don't need to worry about anything with me. I'm doing good. I am fine. What I'm excited about is the fact that the market's breaking out again. I talked a lot about that with you guys. I tried very hard to maintain the projection of what we're seeing now. And now comes the next projection in line. What happens after we finish this move? How does the halving factor in? Some of those sort of factors that I wanted to talk about in today's update. So if you did find value, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. If you guys want to join the Discord server and see how I'm investing my money, what I'm buying, what I'm selling, anything that I'm trading over the course of these bull runs, links are in the description to go ahead and sign up on my website. Thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you guys so much for checking out, reaching in. Thank you so much for checking in, reaching out to me, just simply seeing how I was doing. It means a lot, and I appreciate the support from each and every one of you. Thank you all so much, and with that being said, I will catch you in the next one. As always, peace out.